In chapter 6 of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called the Yoga of Meditation, we find not only instructions on how to meditate, how to calm the mind, but actually how to find complete rest and bliss of the self. But it starts out, as with all yogi practices, with dealing with and actually grappling with the nature of that which Sri Krishna has said, the Atmanam, the mind, which is our greatest friend and our greatest enemy. So let us take, for example, and as a teaching, the 34th verse of the 6th chapter, where Sri Krishna is hearing from Arjuna, where Arjuna says, "O Krishna, the mind indeed is unstable, turbulent, powerful, and obstinate, tenacious, like the tentacles of an octopus. It holds on to the world. It's the tar baby. Whereas you touch it, and then you get stuck, you try to extricate yourself from the world by gripping it more firmly, you get even more further stuck." So Sri Krishna hears that Arjuna, the great disciple, is saying that this mind is so turbulent, hard to control even as the wind. He thinks it is difficult to control, so difficult that as the wind cannot be controlled. But then Sri Krishna goes on to say, "Without doubt, O Arjuna, the mind is unsteady and difficult to restrain. But by practice, by abhyasa, and by indifference or vairagya to worldly objects, it is restrained." Now it is important in all application of study of the Bhagavad Gita to try to understand the meaning of the words that are being used. Even though the Gita is posed in a poetic verse, in a poetic meter, the actual words are used have multiple levels of meaning. Very different than in English language. You'll find in a dictionary, a word will have a primary definition, and then a secondary definition will be only applicable, and it's a minor usage, but not in Sanskrit. Really what happens, you see that there is a first meaning, and then the meaning actually moves into a secondary aspect in the sense of a cause and a reaction. A consequence, if you apply the first meaning, the second will occur, the third, the fourth. So, in the 34th, 35th, and 36th verse of the Bhagavad Gita in chapter 6, we find these words that Sri Krishna is using to have this connotation of the method, the practice which we can employ to actually cause the mind to be our greatest friend. He uses the word pramati, which is troubling, harassing, and even destroying. This is the manas, the mind which is hard to control, even as hard as to control the wind. The word that Arjuna is using actually gives the connotation that the mind is at first troubling. And if it is not controlled, then it becomes harassing. And then if the harassment is left at bay, left unabated and uncontrolled, it becomes destroying to the actual nature of the heart, which is the effulgence of the spirit. He goes on to use the word balavat. Balavat means this mind is strong and powerful. Not only strong and powerful from the habits that are inculcated and strengthened from this life, but the mind has memory of the strength of its habits from prior lives, and so it draws from a seemingly inexhaustible well of strength from uncontrolled lives. Next, Arjuna uses the word dhritam, which means it is intense. The mind can become intense in its grappling or its clinging to that which is adharmic. And through that it becomes hard. And through the hard it becomes fixed, massive, and unyielding. At this stage, we find it very difficult even to employ spiritual methods and sadhana into our lives, because we find that the mind has now become so hardened and unyielding that it will not even soften to even repeated meditation. This is where Sri Ramana Maharshi said that to know the wondrous jnana vichara, to know the nature of God, or in a sense to know and reflect upon the nature of our own self, a softening and melting must occur. So we can find that this softening and melting occurs with the mind. And here we find the truth of the words of the great Sri Ramakrishna, where he said, the mind is everything. It is this mind that must be employed to soften its habit, to truly start to live from the heart. So the words that Sri Krishna uses in response to this declaration of Arjuna is, the Lord says, I agree that this yoga is difficult to attain by him whose self is uncontrolled. But by him whose self is controlled, by striving, it is possible to attain through the proper means. So the attainment of this yoga, this union, this yuj, what the actual meaning of yoga is a union with God. And if we say the nature of God is bliss and the self, we will find that, in a sense, the goal is not to just control the mind and be sober and a master over the senses, but we're looking for the actual bliss of the self. We're actually looking for that joy and to enter into communion and yoga with the Lord's love and expansiveness. How is it done? The Lord now uses the very significant word which he applies to the proper means that he says. The word is grihate. The Lord, in using the word grihate as the method of practice, has several levels of meaning. The first is applied, the consequence of the first brings forth the second and third and fourth and so on. The first meaning of grihate, which the Lord is applying and directing Arjuna to actually have this proper means of yoga, is first, the mind must be restrained. Through restraint, we find we're able to grip the mind. We're able to actually hold it. And from this first restraint and gripping, we will be able to subdue it. This process of subduing the mind is actually a method of sublimation, because as the mind is subdued, it is literally brought to rest. This is the key word that we're after. We're after rest. Here again we find where Ramana Maharshi was asked, what is moksha? What is liberation? What is the goal of yoga? He said, quoting the 46th Psalm of the Holy Bible itself, he said, to be still and know that I am God. This stillness, this bringing the mind to rest through meditation, through control, and actually the process of divination through mantra japa or calling on the name of the Lord, brings not only the mind but the body and all the levels of our consciousness to a state of suspended rest. When that happens, when we simply become still, become quiet, become restful, then what even Lao Tzu said in the Tao, or the way, is that the self will now become self-effulgent. Hari Om.